It really warms my heart, to think about how many people there are that really care about literacy in this state and the outcomes for our students. I also want to thank those of you who are watching the recording, and let's get started. So this event was born out of really two reasons. It was born from two reasons. And the first was EdNC's leader, Mevin Rash. And so Mevin and I were talking one day, and she said, "Can we get Kimyana Burke to come down to North Carolina?" And I said, "I don't know. Let's find out." And very, very shortly thereafter, we found out that we could. And we were very excited. And I said, "Mevin, we should have a small gathering with the folks that we typically speak to, and let them ask Kimyana some questions." And Mevin said, in her, ever wise Mevin, she said, Kimyana has advised the state, whether it be DPI or the General Assembly, she's advised them often on our new reading law. And so she's been made available to the small circles. But let's make her available to, the large circle. And I said, okay, well, if we're going to do that, we're going to need some folks from DPI and from the UNC system. And we had two incredible leaders that answered the call. The second reason that I wanted to do this event, I tell everybody that will listen to me that this is the greatest job I've ever had. And the reasons are many. But among them is that I have the opportunity to shine light on our teachers and our students, and it's an incredible, incredible privilege. The other is that I get to talk to leaders in decision-making authority, and I get to hear from them what's happening, why it's happening, what they're worried about. And it's so much information, I'm not always able to process it all. And I'm also not able to fit it all into my articles, though they be long. So I said, why not report live? Let's ask them the questions live. Let's let you hear the answers live. And I'm so very honored that everyone is here. We have Kimyana Burke, who is a senior policy fellow at Excel in Ed. In this role, she supports states pursuing a comprehensive approach to K-3 reading policy by assisting state leaders in building new or improving existing K-3 reading policies, with a heavy focus on supporting successful policy implementation. First time I talked to Kimyana, she was working with 16 states. Today, she's working with 23 states and the District of Columbia. And so that's what's happening with this movement. That was in a few short years.
Yes, 2 years.
Before that, as many know, Kimyana was the state literacy director for Mississippi. And she held that position from 2013 to 2019. She was there before. Nope, she was there right after Mississippi passed its Literacy-Based Promotion Act, which I call their Science of Reading Bill. And she was there through the time that Mississippi shocked everybody with their growth in the 2019 NAEP scores. Laura Bilbrow-Berry leads and supports the UNC system's educator preparation programs and network of laboratory schools. Prior to joining the UNC system office, Bilbrow-Berry engaged in a variety of roles within the field of education, serving as a teacher, school improvement coordinator, curriculum specialist, and director of federal programs. Laura, as some of you may remember, is also North Carolina's 2000-2001 Teacher of the Year.
It was a long time ago.
Kelly Murray Bentheim serves as the Read to Achieve Implementation Coordinator within the Office of Early Learning for DPI. Prior to that, she served as the Early Literacy Consultant for the Northwest region. This is her bio, y'all. It says prior to that. I have it on good authority that she's still working both jobs because she's not ready to let her regional consulting job go. She began her career in education as a teacher in 1996 and went on to serve as an interventionist, instructional coach, literacy lead, and district director for the Office of Early Learning in Winston-Salem for Sight. Thank you all for being here. So I guess we should start with why it's important that we continue to ask questions as North Carolina implements its Science of Reading law. This is a graph that I was showing earlier today, and it maps the NAEP scores for fourth graders 2011 through 2017. That top line, the topmost line, is North Carolina. The purple line is the United States, and the bottom line is Mississippi. One thing that stands out to me in these numbers is, as many of you remember, in 2012, North Carolina passed Read to Achieve, and it was implemented with the 13-14 school year. So in 2017, those were the fourth graders who were the first kindergarten through third graders that went through Read to Achieve. And we see, what's happening with our line. If we look at what happens in 2019, this is why Kimyana Burke became famous. In 2013, the year after we implemented Read to Achieve, Mississippi passed the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. 2019 was the first cohort of students that had gone through kindergarten through third grade after that act was implemented. And we see what's happened with Mississippi. There have been many attempts to improve literacy instruction. There have been federal and state initiatives. And it's really hard to find one that works. Whatever happened in Mississippi, it worked for that state. We have now passed a new law in 2021. And you see how long it takes to figure out what's happening. If you see how long we have to wait for cohorts of students to go through. And I don't think we should wait that long to make sure we're on the right path. And that's what this evening is going to be about. So with that, I want to start us off with Kimyana. And each of our guests are going to give a short introduction, and then we'll move to Q&A.
Good evening, everyone. All of those things you said really makes me seem important, but I'm just here to talk about some literacy and implementation. It's just great to be here this evening. And are you going to advance the slides?
Absolutely.
Okay. So with my work at Excel in Ed, it's the Foundation for Excellence in Education. Our chairman of the board is former Governor Jeb Bush, who founded the organization after he left the governorship in Florida in 2008. We have policy and advocacy, C3 and C4. A couple of my advocacy colleagues have come here to support me this evening. And we are really across the country, so we do work in all of the states. In my role, I really wear two hats. The first hat is to support state leaders, state education agencies, literacy leaders, chief academic officers in their implementation. And so those are the 23 states in DC in what we call the Early Literacy Network, and North Carolina is a part of that network. We meet quarterly. They're their own professional learning community. They share resources so that no one has to recreate the wheel, right? So in the other hat, I work alongside our advocacy team to work with policymakers who are either drafting new early literacy policies or they want to strengthen the policies that they already have in place. We'll do an analysis of where their laws are and say, well, these are some of the gaps that could strengthen this if you were to pass, these particular policies. So I first want to talk just a little bit about the national landscape. Where are we as a country with early literacy policies? For those states that are shaded in the very, very dark blue, those are states that have comprehensive early literacy policies. And I'll tell you a bit about what comprehensive policies mean. As you can see, Mississippi is dark blue, so is North Carolina, right? So we have about a dozen states or so that have passed comprehensive early literacy policies, and this was from 2021. So we have to update it this summer with all of the just exciting laws that have been passed this year, including Alaska. Alaska just passed a comprehensive early literacy policy. I was told before I came here, I may have to just hold it. I was told before I came to Excel in Ed that they have been working with Alaska for 9 years to pass an early literacy policy. And not sure how widely it's publicized, but Alaska is actually 51st in the nation for 4th grade reading, right? Their makeup is completely different as far as access to schools and all of those things. And they have really had some champions for this fight to pass this early literacy bill, and it finally passed this year. I'm so glad I've been able to be a part of it. I was able to fly to Anchorage last year to testify. In addition to Alaska, yeah, I think this is kind of going in. Yeah. In addition to Alaska, and I do have some sinus drainage going on, so if you hear this bass in my voice, it's not in. Okay, thank you so much. So in addition to Alaska, Delaware, Virginia, Kentucky, Utah, Missouri, and Michigan this year have already passed, whether it's a comprehensive policy or components to strengthen their policies, or just certain components of the comprehensive policy set. So let's talk about the Mississippi story, and as we talk about that, I'll talk about these components. All of these components that are listed here are in North Carolina's Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021. I am a bit jealous because North Carolina did make the bold move to actually put into its legislation the role of teacher preparation programs. That's something that we did not do in Mississippi, but we have, in a collaborative way, tried to bring our higher ed on board. But that's one thing that I'm really excited about, because we have to make sure that we all know that this is a continuum. For so long, it's been, okay, well, you're not preparing students in K-12. So the colleges believe that they're not getting well-prepared students that may have to take remedial courses. And then what do we say in K-12? That the educator preparation programs, am I doing something?
I think we have to name
I might have to get your mic.
No problem, you have to slide, just speak directly.
Okay, yeah. I'm doing this and trying to make sure my nose isn't running.
You're doing great.
So in K-12, we talk about how we feel like our teachers may not be as prepared as they should be when they enter the classroom. So including educator preparation programs in a K-3 reading policy is powerful, because it allows each of us to see ourselves in student outcomes. So these are the principles that we feel make up a comprehensive approach to an early literacy policy. The first one is educator training. In Mississippi, we adopted letters similar to your efforts here in North Carolina. We begin with training our literacy coaches, and then we begin the rollout of our teachers, beginning with those in our lowest performing schools. So some of the efforts that we are implementing are very strategic and intentional, and includes making sure that we're supporting our schools that have, through data, shown that they need the most intensive support. So we begin with those teachers in our lowest performing schools. We learned very quickly that we had to make sure that our administrators were also included in early literacy training. So we begin with the educator training. We used only letters trainers in Mississippi. Now remember, we talked earlier about, what was the media coverage around literacy in Mississippi during that time in 2013. I said, well, all of it just said that we were last, right? I mean, everything that we saw in the news was that Mississippi's last again, right? So there really wasn't any engagement around how we can get better as a state until we passed our Literacy-Based Promotion Act. But one thing that we also knew was that we needed to start with a clean slate. We knew that our teachers were being prepared very differently depending on the university, and so our investment in training was to ensure that we were building teacher knowledge and that we were going to have a common language across our state as to what it means to teach reading and how we should teach reading. So the training was extremely important, and making sure that we had those letters trainers were also important. We just did not do the train-the-trainer model. We just felt that we didn't have the capacity to do that. So we didn't want to rely on that. As you know, messages can get lost in the shuffle, right? So educator training was key. Next thing was coaching for teachers. We actually started with coaching first before we adopted the training because we had to go through the RFP process. So I want you to understand this about the timeline. Our law passed in April of 2013. I was hired in July of 2013, along with about 22 coaches. And on August 1st, we started. By September 1, coaches were in schools. Right, that's what I said. So, coaches were in schools. So one thing that we wanted to make sure that we did was that we wanted to hire people who not only had the knowledge, but could also play well with other adults. Because that's going to be the most important part, that no one is going to want to listen to what you have to say, especially when you're asking them to change their practices, if you can't build those types of relationships. So it was extremely important for us. The goal was to hire 75 coaches the first year. Again, they hired me, my assistant director, and 22 coaches. And we were fine with it. And there was a lot of coverage saying, do you mean to tell us that you can't find 75 people who can be, yep, that's what we're saying. And we got to that number, I think going into year 4, maybe. We hired, we utilized our retirees for those who could work part-time. And then also, we just wanted to ensure that we were getting quality candidates. And what we noticed was over time, for those teachers who had gone through letters, for those who had been in schools that had literacy coaches, we started getting a better qualified pool of candidates. And then we were able to reach our number. But we knew that we had to begin with educator knowledge. So again, we put coaches in schools, but we did that in a way where we put our coaches, again, in our lowest performing schools first. We chose schools, not districts, and I know that North Carolina is looking at it differently by looking at putting coaches in districts potentially. We chose schools instead of districts because we have several districts in our state that may have very high income communities, but there may be 2 schools that are in the rural part of that district that are still a part of that district. So overall, the district is doing well, right? You have these 5 schools that are A's, B's, then you have these 2 schools over here that may be D or F. But when you look at it all together, the district is scoring really high. So we didn't want to include those schools and say, well, they must be doing okay. So we looked specifically at school data, rank ordered schools by those with the highest percentage of students below proficient, and we put our coaches there. So we intentionally did that, and we were only able to include more schools when we added more bodies. So as many coaches as we had, then we were able to add additional schools. Early identification, which is something that, again, you have, making sure that parents are aware early and often how their children are doing. We also have a Dyslexia Screener Law in Mississippi. Our compulsory school age is 6 years old, which I believe is the same here, which means that there can be students who show up to school in 1st grade. So we want to make sure that for dyslexia, we're screening students at the end of kindergarten and at the beginning of 1st grade. So we do have dyslexia screeners in addition to universal screeners. And then, of course, parent communication. Parents want to know what they can do to support their children at home. There were a lot of parents who were surprised during the pandemic about how their children were doing. Their hearts were breaking because you get progress reports saying that your child is okay, and then you're sitting next to them while they're struggling to do work online, whether synchronously or asynchronously, and you're saying, my child is struggling. For those parents who could afford it, they got additional help. For those who couldn't afford it, they didn't. They couldn't, right? So we're making sure that our parents have this communication, and I have shared North Carolina's Digital Children's Literacy Initiative website with a lot of states because it's a really great resource. And then individual reading plans for those students who are identified for having reading deficiencies. And making sure the teachers are equipped to provide those interventions that they need and monitoring those. And then we also have the retention component of our law. People really don't like to talk about it, but we do have the retention component. One thing that I always speak about is prevention over retention. What are all of these things that we should be doing prior to 3rd grade? Please communicate that your Excellent Public Schools Act is not a 3rd grade teacher's responsibility. When students enter school in kindergarten, it is the kindergarten teacher, the 1st grade teacher, the 2nd grade teacher. We know after the first 30 days of school, when we screen students, we can put our hands on those students who are at risk of reading failure. We already know that. So the conversation is around what are we going to do from now until then to make sure that students are ready, that parents and families are ready, and of course the teachers are ready to support students. Next slide. All right, so here's the data. Since Ed and C invited us, I really want to show a few headlines. I didn't show yours though, sorry. Well, all the ones that we've done together. All right, so this was the big deal. The big deal was in 2019, when Mississippi became the only state in the nation that has significant gains in 4th grade reading. And I often talk about what happened in 2015, that it just really kind of flew under the radar. We passed our law in 2013, but there were other things that were at play. So I don't want people to walk away thinking, well, they passed this Literacy Act and that did it. So it really wasn't just that. In addition to passing our literacy law, we had adopted the Common Core standards, we can't say that, college and career readiness standards. That was really Common Core, but we changed a couple of words. We had adopted the Common Core standards. We were beginning to train teachers in Common Core, and with the professional development. We also adopted a more rigorous assessment that was more aligned to NAEP and more aligned to our standards. So we began putting that work in. But we also know that during that time, our teachers began to receive this type of training. Our students began to be identified early and be required to have those interventions. We don't know what's all in policy, state board policy. When we passed our law, I began talking about universal screeners sometimes for your teachers, like, what? I was like, y'all, that's really been in law like forever. Like, that's a part of RTI. So there are things like that if no one's really monitoring it, we check the box and say that we have that in policy and it's supposed to be done, but you really have to make sure that you're monitoring it. So from 2013 to 2015, we actually had a 5 skill score point increase, which was larger than the increase that we had from 2017 to 2019. But we were quietly celebrating, and others were saying, oh, okay, oh, look at Mississippi, they had some gains, and what I say though about our 2019 score, where we met the national average for the first time ever, is that it had to be Mississippi. For so long, it's just been okay. It's been okay for Mississippi to be last. It's been okay, for a lot of these other states, northeastern states, to be in the top 10. That's just kind of how we have just become accustomed to, our rankings. And it was okay for Mississippi. So I'm not just saying it was okay for the rest of the world, but it had become okay for us. But when you begin to experience success like that, you want to continue doing it, right? So we had a lot of buy-in after a while. And what I had to tell my staff was that we're going to have to let our work speak for us. When people see others coming in from the State Department with your State Department badge on, like, oh my God, State Department's here. Normally it's to audit or to give us, these bad remarks. But for us, it was, we're coming to help you. We're the boots on the ground. So we're not only saying that we want children reading by the end of 3rd grade, we're going to help you get there. And that's the part that went over well with our teachers. We had to win them over. So it doesn't matter about, all the others that are in the room. The teachers are like, okay, how is this impacting me? And I don't think I'm ready. And putting coaches in schools and other supports showed them that we were going to help them get there. Okay? Is there one more? So it's going to take, all of these different agencies and entities working together. You know, after the state legislature passes it, the governor signs it, that's not the end, that's really the beginning of it, right? It has to take our Department of Education, colleges of education, to again see themselves in the role that they play in preparing our future educators. Our superintendents and leaders who say that this is a priority and I'm going to hold our schools accountable for it. And then of course our administrators who set the tone and culture for their building, and our teachers who are standing in front of kids every day and we're really responsible for doing this work. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Camilla. Next, we will go to Kelly Bentheim.
Good evening, everyone. You can go ahead and flip to the next slide. I'll go ahead and begin with kind of where we are now with SB 387. It was signed by Governor Hooper in April of 2021, and that's kind of when our journey seemed to begin for everyone. Kind of the media coverage began around this new piece of legislation, but actually we've had legislation like this for many years. On the next slide, this actually began back in 2012 with Read to Achieve. This was the first year I actually became an instructional coach, and I remember when all the directions came down. If you've been in that position, I see some head shaking, and all that information came down. And we began with the same end in mind. We want students reading. We began with a really great goal in mind. But what I like to show about this with this historical background is just like when we talk about the science of reading, you always hear that when we know better, we do better. And that's what happened with SB 387, I believe. When we knew better, we did better. We knew we needed to make that legislation more comprehensive in how it was made. So in 2021, we also had Superintendent Truitt join us, and she would have been here, but you got second string right here with me. She came on board, and immediately you knew literacy was a priority. Immediately, you could feel her sense of urgency around that work. And because of that, she also developed Operation Polaris, and within this vision is literacy. And part of that vision with literacy includes a working group of people that are internal and external stakeholders, a literacy task force that's helping grow and develop this work, which is really important. That's been one of our biggest learnings, I believe, along the way, is that DPI cannot do this work alone. We cannot do it within just the Office of Early Learning. It is going to take a village to do this work, and that village includes all of our internal stakeholders across the state and external partners across the state as well. So when we think about that work moving forward, we kind of think about this early literacy implementation progression timeline. And you'll see here there are many pieces, and this timeline is not the type of timeline where you introduce it, you do it, and it's done. This timeline is ongoing, and it's a cycle. And we're constantly learning and growing as we progress through this timeline. So we're going to take it into little small chunks and break it down for you just a little bit. So when we think at 1 and 2, we think about aligning policies, funding, resources, and we had SB 387, we had the funding. We were really fortunate with House Bill 196, which specifically named letters as our instructional piece for our educators. I was speaking with Lexia today, the letters team, and they were sharing with us that North Carolina is actually the only state in the United States that has named Lexia in legislation for our teachers to specifically have letters as their professional development, which is pretty exciting. But with our cohorts, what we have is it originated with one administrator per school, and then every teacher in pre-K through 5. And then the department decided to expand that even more. So using some of our ESSER dollars, we decided to add an instructional coach per school, an elementary EC resource teachers, along with our ELL teachers. So we knew we had to kind of extend the continuum, and quite frankly, that continuum can still be extended even further. We always like to talk about cohort 1. So when we think about this, in April is when SB 387 came into be. That summer we worked on the contract with Voyager Sopris. That contract was signed in August, and cohort 1 districts began right away. Phenomenal. Phenomenal to have that many folks begin that quickly. And so we really relied heavily on cohort 1. What did this feel like? What is this like? What barriers are you running into? What do you need from the department? What are you missing? How is your training going? They truly led the way. Them along with around 10 districts we had that started this work even before it became legislation. They were a little bit ahead of the curve. And so we also included them. And we have a professional learning network where Amy Ryan, our director of the Office of Early Learning, and we meet with them continually. What's working, what's not working. It's made up of district leaders and principals. And so what is happening that's working well with this work and what is not. And they also helped us develop this tips and tricks form that we use for the cohorts moving ahead so that they would kind of know what are some things that you need to be aware of, what do you need to be prepared for. And now we've expanded that to cohort 2, and we are even starting to add cohort 3 folks in the mix as well. So when we look at our letters cohort, since we began in August, we have 25,000 educators that have already begun their training with letters. And it's hard to understand the impact of letters training until you've gone through it or until you've facilitated it. And this week on Tuesday, I had the opportunity to facilitate Unit 2 and Volume 1 of letters with a team of teachers. And they were tired, and they wanted to pack up their classrooms, and they wanted to clean up, and they had things they had to do on their end of the year list. But what was amazing, and sometimes you have those moments where you wonder, is this too much? Is this, we're here for children? But at the end of that session, one of those teachers came, and she was a first-year teacher, and she came up to me at the end, and she said, "Thank you so much." And she said, "I just wish I'd had this 6 months ago." And that's when I know, and I always know, but that's when you feel you're doing the right work. And you're in the right space. So cohort 3 will begin in the fall of 2022, and at that point, we will have everyone in progress moving through the letters. Kimyana mentioned this a little bit briefly earlier. We are looking towards this tiered coaching model. So the work really only begins with the training. I mean, letters, I always like to say, it can live and die right in that manual they give you. It can go nowhere if teachers aren't supported with how to use it and what do you do with it. And so part of that work is, yes, we have OEL, Early Education Consultants. There are 2 of us per region, 16 for the state. That was my work. We supported the Northwest region. And I do have the opportunity to dig into the school level, but mostly it's district work, a lot. And so what we're looking to add are 115 early literacy specialists. And that work actually went before the board last month and is actually sitting, hopefully, to go in front of the GA during their short session. And what we're looking at is funding an early literacy specialist for every district. And yes, like Kimyana said, we will not be getting to the school level in all districts, but we will in some. So just from prior experience, I know this. I've been in a really large district, one of the top 6 largest districts in our state, worked there at their central office. We have instructional coaches in every single school. What I also knew as one of those instructional coaches a while back, we didn't always get the information and have the support we needed to do what we needed to do in our schools. And so in those larger districts, that's how this person can serve. They're supporting those coaches and how they coach in their school buildings. I also, in my prior work in the Northwest region, have a district that I serve that is really small, and they have 5 schools. I've gone into every single one of those schools and worked with every single one of those teachers looking at data. And in those districts, they can get to the school level. So is this the end game? No, but it's a really strong beginning when you're looking at the fact that we're trying to serve our entire state when we look at how do we continue this work and grow it. We're also looking at also those North Carolina literacy facilitators. We'll start with 6 of those, and they are going to be full-time trainers for letters. So for sustainability purposes, as we continue into cohort 3 is over half of our state. So cohort 1, right, was a quarter, cohort 2 was a quarter, and the other half we have going into cohort 3. These facilitators are going to kind of help take some of the load off of districts, and it also gets us away from having to have that connection all the time with letters. But we also, like Kimyana said, we didn't want to leave it willy-nilly. And we wanted to have some control over those facilitators, who they were, how they perform, and how do we evaluate their facilitation, and how is it working for districts. So when we have the ability to hire those positions, then we are able to manage how they perform and how they facilitate for districts. Okay, thank you. And the same work we're looking at as we progress through the pre-K model. So a few additional legislative pieces, which I think these are really important pieces. We have in Section 5, we have the literacy instruction standards. These are kind of your instructional guidelines. What does this look like in practice? These are not changing the ELA standards. These are ways that we implement this work that we're learning through letters. We also have literacy intervention plans, individual reading plans. Those literacy intervention plans, they were first submitted in March of this year. It was a test run. Every single one of them was looked at, and every single one of them individually was given feedback. Moving into the fall, they will submit again, beginning on August 1st, and then it will become tied to funding. So if your plan is not approved because of whatever reason, is it not aligned to the science of reading? Do you not have all the components you need for supplemental and intensive instruction? Then that funding will not be given. And that funding is really important because the funding is what helps them implement the pieces in the intervention plans. I will say for this fall, what we are doing, because we have to recognize that our districts are in a learning curve. We don't just pass legislation and then districts turn on a dime and can change curriculum like that, can purchase curriculum like that. They have their own internal processes that they have to go through. So for the fall, when they submit, we're gonna have 3 kind of designations. They're gonna either be approved, approved with recommendations, or not approved. Both approved and approved with recommendations are going to receive the funding because it just is not right to not supply funding when they are working towards that goal. We had many folks in their plans who said, we recognize that our core curriculum is not a high quality instructional material. We're working to change it, but we have to work with our school board. We have to get approval. We have our own internal RFP processes. So that's something that we're excited about. And of course, the legislative piece around the educator prep programs, which I'm sure Laura will talk about here momentarily.
Kelly, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
You know, when you talk about the literacy intervention plans, approved with recommendations, not approved. The folks who are not approved, are they receiving feedback? Are they receiving guidance on what happened?
Yes. So even this time for the run-through, they did receive feedback. And it is very, very specific and intentional feedback. So the literacy intervention plans, they were trained over 5 sessions. We worked with our IOPS department and MTSS, and we also worked with our EC department as well in thinking through how do we support this work. So the literacy intervention plans are very specific. They have intervention guidelines that are based off the REL guidelines around intervention and best practices for intervention. And then the feedback then is directly tied to each of those components. So they got feedback that stated, yes, you're on track, those were observations. We observed this, you got it, great. No, these are recommendations. And then after they received feedback, each one of their consultants reached out by email. We're here, please contact us, let us know how we can help you. And so we've been out then supporting, helping them kind of redesign and rethink about how they do that work. The exciting piece, I think, about this is part of the literacy intervention plan, we know you just don't start with intervention, you start with core instruction. So we included core instruction in the intervention plan. So they had to tell us what they were doing for core and what materials they were using. So when we went in to give feedback, all of our consultants had copies of those plans. We were able to help them see, this is why you have a recommendation here. This is what you need to think about. You're asking a teacher to do core, supplemental, and intensive. That's impossible, right? We'd like to dream that to happen, but that's not possible.
Did the legislation, I can't remember, did it require identifying core curriculum or?
No, it identified that they had to put in individual reading. They had to have an intervention plan, but we could designate the form ourselves as a state department.
So at least for now, it will include core.
Yes, it includes core. And we did that because we didn't want them to jump immediately to intervention when we know that core instruction is an issue. If you've got a class of 20 kindergartners and 18 of them are performing well below benchmark, we've got a core instruction issue if it's middle of the year. And so we need to think about that. We need our districts thinking in that way, that we're not constantly pulling kids out of rooms one at a time, and we're not constantly trying to get kids pushed through to some other type of service. We're trying to problem solve within our classroom with really good instruction. So if we don't give our attention to core, we're going to end up more and more and more students not getting the services they need. Also, the Digital Children's Reading Initiative. One of the big components, too, I think that really helped beef up SB 387 is parent notification and parent resources. So these sites are already up on the DPI class site. It is legislated that by July 1st of this summer, all districts have to have this on their site as well. These are all digital resources that we have provided and links, and they are actually on there by skill set. So if you need to work on phonemic awareness, you go here. If you need to work on fluency, you go here. If you need to work on comprehension, you can use these pieces. And like I said, districts have to have them on their site by July 1st. Another big piece and component of this is parent notification. So with the individual reading plans, as soon as a child has an individual reading plan, that child's family, parents need to be notified, period. Now, we already had notification laws in the original legislation back to 2013. So every time we do our screener, BOI, MOI, EOI, that documentation had to be sent home. That was a great start, but what we learned is a lot of families didn't understand what in the world those documents were saying. They didn't know what the data charts meant. And over the past several years, we've had a lot of changes in our screeners. So they would learn one thing, and then the next year it would change, and they'd have to learn it again, and then they learned to do something else, and it would change again. So that was a great start. We still do that even with amplified dibbles. BOI, MOI, EOI data is sent home. What's different now, though, is if a student is below or well below benchmark, right, on that screener. Now think about that screener. We're not talking about proficiency. We're talking about that child we already know is at risk to not be a reader by end of year if they are below or well below benchmark. As soon as that happens, then the notification has to be sent home, and it's not just a notification, it's also, this is what we're doing in the classroom. These are resources that you can use at home, and we're really strongly encouraging them to do that in person through parent-teacher conferences. Although that's not legislated, but that is what we're encouraging. So that's kind of a breakdown of all of those pieces of the implementation progression. And this is a really important chart. So this is kind of like a saturation chart where we look at our project year by year. And you'll see we've got the K-5 instructional coaches folks there, those going through K-5 letters, the early childhood letters for our pre-K teachers and leaders, and then the administrative. And this is really important to note because this work takes time. Just as I believe Rupen was saying at the beginning, this work is going to take years. And I really think it's important to be clear about what will be happening when. And obviously things are going to shift a little bit earlier than we see here. But this year we began to train Volume 1 for Cohort 1. They are learning that content. That content is a lot of learning. And it is a shift in instructional practices for many teachers. And I say that as a teacher who made that shift myself and went kicking and screaming, quite frankly. Until I learned better. And I learned it through a personal experience I can share later. They're learning Volume 1. So when we go into this year, we would hope to see part of Volume 1 be implemented. But that just doesn't happen magically. They're going to have support for that implementation to occur. They just don't go to letters and learn it and then it be applied. If you think about the Joyce and Showers research, we know that to get for them to have 95% application, they need coaching, they need mentoring, they need support. But at the same time that they're working through that, they're also learning Volume 2. So Volume 2 is beginning. And then the next year, you might begin, and you would hope to see it, probably even before then, some shifts in our K-1 instructional practices, and we might begin to see that show up in our DIBLs, PSF, right, letter naming fluency, some of those indicators that we have on our screeners, we would hope to see show up then, and then you can see it progressing on out. What we don't want is the misunderstanding that we began letters in Cohort 1 this fall, and our EOG scores this year are going to go up 15 percentage points. Because that's just not the reality. We have teachers of students who were in kindergarten in 4 years. Now, we really want to take a look at them, right? But we have teachers who are learning the content this year as they're teaching 3rd grade. So I think this is really important. We're going to be monitoring growth along the way. And then we are going to get to overall proficiency as we think about that 3rd grade data, but we're going to have to monitor growth along the way. So along those lines, we're working on a comprehensive evaluation plan. We want to make sure that we're evaluating this along the way and evaluating it both quantitatively and qualitatively. How are teachers feeling about this work? How are they feeling supported? How about principals? What supports do they need? District leaders, what do they need? So we're going to look at 3 main areas: educator leader knowledge. How is their knowledge shifting? Support processes. Are we really seeing instructional impacts at all? impact on learning, and then finally, we're gonna obviously do a large data analysis. We've begun this work working with our Office of Learning Recovery, who have been really supportive of us, and we've already met with them twice, meeting again tomorrow actually, to talk through how do we do a proper evaluation of this work. The Office of Early Learning does not have a built-in evaluator. We have lots of consultants and lots of support, but we do have the Office of Learning Recovery, which we're grateful for. So they're going to be helping support us in that work along the way. But evaluation is crucial along the way because that's how we monitor and know if implementation is truly occurring. And I want to end here. Dr. Tracy Wheaton, I don't know if any of you are familiar with her. She's phenomenal. Heard her speak several times. And she says, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And I think we are at a critical moment right now. I've been in North Carolina for 24 years of my 26 years in education. I will be honest and say I didn't dream of working on Read to Achieve implementation. If you had told me that when that law came out, I would probably have said, no, that's not my work. What I can say is I've never been more proud to be doing this work. And I say that as a teacher who believes in this work and knows the importance of literacy, and I really believe that we are on the right track. And so we in this room, philanthropists, leaders, community partners, educators, consultants, journalists, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Why now? Why not now? We must do it now. And there's no more waiting. So.
Thank you. And we will go next to Laura Bill-Roberry.
All right. Can you all hear me okay? No?
I don't think it's on.
I probably need a license to make it work.
You know.
How's that? That better? Okay. Well, I have to start by saying September 1st will be my 30th year in public education. Done PK to 20. This is the first time in my career where policy, our friends in P12, and our higher ed community are working to solve a really important problem. My second grade teacher soul is so happy that we are here, and I'm so grateful to get a chance to do this work. So our journey in the UNC system began back in 2017, where the Leading on Literacy report came out at the behest of former President Margaret Spellings for the UNC system. There were some recommendations there of what we needed to do in terms of educator preparation and literacy. And so throughout 2018, 2019, group of educator preparation folks, K-12, outside experts, they worked in a community of practice to really dig deep into this issue of educator preparation and literacy. And as a part of that, they presented to our Board of Governors in February of 2020. This is well in advance of the Excellent Public Schools Act. And as a result of that, the Board of Governors adopted the resolution on teacher preparation. That charged us with 3 things, the first of which was to make sure that our educator preparation programs fully integrated the science of reading, and that would be done through a unified literacy framework. The second piece is that we were to create or find a professional development opportunity for in-service teachers, and we would try to pilot that in 2021, that summer. And then we would have system-wide goals in teacher preparation. So I'm going to tell you about the framework and how all of that came about. The second part, we had an RFP to get the provider for professional development. It was about to go out the door, and then we knew that there was going to be this legislation, so we knew that we needed to make sure that we were aligned with that within our universities. So that we handed over to our friends in K-12, and they've done an excellent job with that. So in developing the framework, we wanted to make sure that we honored the expertise within our universities. And so we solicited, folks applied to be a literacy fellow. And these are our university faculty. And beginning in the fall of 2020, they developed a unified framework. And basically, I call them big buckets. These are the components. You see the big 5 that we all are aware of. We also wanted to make sure that concepts of print were included, that writing was included, And these buckets included competencies and sub-competencies of the things that our teacher candidates need to know and be able to do to be excellent beginning reading teachers. So there was a lot of debate, heavy debate amongst our faculty who are working on this. They also created implementation guidance to go along with the competencies and sub-competencies, and they created a self-assessment to be able, so we could align our courses with this particular framework. We sent that out to all 15 of our ed prep programs. We asked for feedback. We got a lot of feedback. Some of it was a little heated, but it was good feedback because there were things that we had missed in the process of developing those competencies and sub-competencies, important points. We took all of that feedback, the literacy fellows did, and they made adjustments, and the final framework and the implementation guidance was put out into the ether of wonderful educator preparation in March of 2021. And so as a part of that, the first thing we had to do was make sure everybody was aware. And so we did a lot of communication with our educator preparation programs, making sure that they knew what this was about. They'd already seen it. This was the final product, however. We also asked them to do a self-study. And so what that meant is that they had to look at their courses in special education and general curriculum and elementary and how that aligned with this framework. We did that in 3 phases. They took all of 21 to do that. They finished up in December to really examine where the holes were, where the things that were going well, what are some pieces that needed improvement. That was not just undergraduate programs. We asked them to look at their Master of Arts in Teaching, their alternative licensure programs, residency, all of those pieces to really examine where things were going well and where we needed improvement and things that needed to change as a part of that. They were required to create an action plan. And so the ultimate goal was that this framework had to be integrated by fall of 2022. We're coming up to fall of 2022. So since December, and really before then, our schools of education and colleges of education have been working on course redesign, looking at the sequencing of their courses. Some are adding courses, looking at field experiences, all of those pieces so that we can make sure that that framework is throughout all of our educator preparation programs and all of those pathways. So as a part of that, we were very gracious to be able to receive funding from the Goodnight and Spangler Foundations. And we wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to do some research around this. And so this is what I think the best partnerships that we have. We selected 5 institutions. They will receive some funding to be able to do some really deep dives into their redesign process, but then also think about innovations. Think about really creative ways to make sure that candidates are well versed in the science of reading. All of the literacy faculty at those 5 campuses are involved in the letters training. They have a sample of students who we call our literacy scholars who are also involved in the letters training. And those candidates, teacher candidates, are placed in classrooms for their field experiences with teachers who are going through the letters training. And so part of this is to really study how does that work? Is that supportive? It is. But really making sure that if I'm a teacher candidate, imagine I'm learning this new content, my faculty's learning it with me, where I'm going to the school for my placement, my teacher is able to support this. And so we're really seeing that good triangulation of information so that candidates feel really supported. In addition to that, we have our lab schools. President Hans was really adamant about making sure that our lab schools were included, and so the teachers in K-3 at our lab schools are doing the letters training as well. And then we did a coalition of the willing for our educator preparation faculty at the 10 other institutions. And so we have faculty members across those institutions, a sample, who are also through their first year of the letters training as well. This, I think, as we're getting to the first year evaluation, we're just pulling our data, looking at all of those pieces. We've done interviews, surveys, all of those pieces to find out how this process has worked so that we can learn from that and share that with our other educator preparation programs.
All right, I just had a quick question. You're sending teacher candidates from these 5 universities, and we can name the 5.
Yes.
App State, Fayetteville State, North Carolina A&T, UNC Charlotte, and UNC Pembroke.
Correct.
You're sending these teacher candidates into the neighboring districts, the districts where these universities are at, and they are kind of getting an early residency.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen this improve partnerships between those universities and those districts?
Yes. One of the things I think from Fayetteville State, the school district that they're working with expressed that they were having a really difficult time screening kindergartners for their coming in terms of their literacy pieces and all of those pieces. Well, the students, the literacy scholars who've gotten this knowledge are helping with that process and are planning to continue to help with that process. What we found in our self-study was assessment across the board for our educator preparation programs was an area of improvement, not just knowing our candidates, assessing our teacher candidates about what they know and are able to do, but also how are they going to learn to assess little people when they get into their classrooms. And so that was a piece that was really glaring as it came out in terms of our self-study. And so this is just an example of, oh, okay, I'm going to go do this assessment that I might have to do in the future, and they're getting real-world, real-time practice. So what gets measured gets done. And so for our institutions, we do have goals for them. We want to make sure that we're putting out the best teachers that we can into our public school classrooms. We want to make sure that they're well prepared. And so we were looking at several metrics to be able to determine that. First, of course, is our Foundations of Reading exam, which our candidates in special education general curriculum and elementary are required to take in order to get their licenses. We're looking at those first-year pass rates, mainly because that's the closest they are to their educator preparation program. We want to improve those. We also are looking at outcome data, our K2 EBOS data. I'm so excited that we have a unified K2 assessment that we're using across the state, which is really important to ed prep programs because we can really see what our candidates are able to do in terms of impact in their classrooms. We also monitor EOGs, but this was the area where we knew we needed improvement, and so that's the metric that we chose. We also wanted to make sure we had some of that qualitative data, and so beginning with last year, there's a recent graduate survey that all graduates of EPPs take. We added, in collaboration with the Department of Public Instruction, we added literacy-specific items so that our candidates could tell us, well, how well did you think you were prepared in your program? Did you have enough experiences in practicing the different components in the science of reading? And so for us, we wanted to make sure that we had system-wide goals and moving forward, improving that overall performance. But then we also, in our data, when we were digging into it, we realized that we wanted to reduce the gap between our candidates, white graduates, and those who are African American. We had some real disparities there. And so we have goals that are in place to be able to reduce that gap so we can make sure that all of our candidates are well prepared. So we have a lot of work to do. The progress monitoring, all of those pieces, our next steps for us are, with this last budget, we have been charged to get an external evaluator to look at ed prep programs, integration of the science of reading. That's not just UNC system, that's private institutions as well. And so we have engaged with Teacher Preparation Inspection US. They've been highly recommended to us by national experts. They will be digging deep into all of our ed prep programs beginning this fall, and that means they're going to look at course syllabi, they're looking at classroom observations, they're looking at course assignments, sequencing, they'll be doing interviews with not only the faculty but also the students. We'll get the results of that at the end of December, and then from there, what we'll do is analyze our self-assessment, look at where we are and see if there are adjustments that we need to make sure that our programs can implement and make sure it's fully integrated. We also will, of course, continue the implementation of the framework. Some of our campuses were far ahead before we even began. Others, they're super small. They have 3 faculty who teach all of the literacy courses. We know that they're going to need some more support in that endeavor. And then, of course, we got to track progress. I will say Kelly and I are in meetings all the time. We're great partners. Her colleague Amy Ryan as well. I think this is just a really great endeavor to be able to make sure that we're continuing that conversation, not only with our folks that are in education world, but also our policymakers as well.
Thank you. Thank you, all 3 of you. That was a very, thorough overview. I appreciate it in a good way. But it really gives us an idea of what happened in Mississippi, what the experience was prior to the results, and what's going on in North Carolina. We can see some similarities, we can see some differences. My plan was to take the questions I've gotten from readers and from some of you and ask them now in a Q&A. But I'm looking at the time, and I don't want to run out of time for you guys to ask questions, y'all in the room. And so if you have questions, the first thing I'd like you to do, we've got index cards on the tables. We should have some pens. And if you don't have any, just, raise a hand.
I need a pen on that.
And make sure you write that down so that if we run out of time, I'll have that question and I'll get it answered. But if you have a question now, then I'd be happy to come down and let you ask a question. And that, all right, let me come down. Do you mind coming a little bit?
Mississippi did a test for dyslexia at the end of kindergarten and first grade. Is that in our system? Is question 1. Question 2 is they were intentional in engaging their families. We have the July 1st, but they also, she gave an example earlier today where they were busing the families to the school to engage them in the trust and learning process. Is that in any of our framework also? Thank you.
Rupen, you want to introduce Margaret?
Yeah.
Everybody know Margaret? This is Margaret.
You want to take that, Laura?
I can?
No. So I will say this, there is not an official dyslexia screener as you're speaking of that they have in Mississippi, but with Amplified Dibbles 8, they do have built-in dyslexia screeners with the RAN and then the letter naming fluency and another automaticity measure that are in there that are available for free for folks to use. And we put that information out there and that information was there for them to use. We were very careful to say though that this isn't a screener to say you have dyslexia. It is an at-risk indicator and how do they use that information. As far as what you're talking about with the families and truly engaging them, that is, so as a state agency in a local control state, we can do a lot of recommendation making. And then it's difficult to see that follow through. I will say that is one of our hopes, though, with the 115 in each district. When we have a DPI-funded employee, where we have an MOU with the district, and that an elementary literacy specialist is in that district, our hope is that that person can then make those connections to make those things happen at the local level. And that's going to be part of our agreement with the district, is that person is going to be at the table during literacy discussions. That person is going to be at the table with coaches. That person is going to have access to their schools and work in alignment with those district leaders to ensure some of those things happen at the local level that oftentimes we aren't able to dig that deep in to ensure are happening.
I hear questions all the time about our coaching model, and you've addressed it, both of you have addressed the differences in the coaching model, but I think one of the things that maybe is misunderstood in that is that I believe teachers want coaches in the schools and need coaches in the schools, but these literacy specialists are needed also for the purpose that you're talking about as well as others. Kimyana, it reminds me of something you talk about, which is it opens the door to walking in your authority.
Right. Because our model is such that we have literacy coaches, We also have regional literacy coordinators who serve as coaches and coaches of coaches, right? So we may have a literacy coach and a regional coordinator may serve one school, but then support 4 to 5 coaches. And then we have assistant state literacy coordinators that are a part of the literacy leadership team who support regional coordinators who also support coaches. So we have this kind of, I don't like to call it hierarchy, but kind of this model to where there are all these different levels of support. And I always say walk in your authority. As a state agency, we have local control in Mississippi as well. I think that one of the things that honestly really helped us was when Dr. Wright came from Maryland. She didn't have any ties to anybody, right? And it was, okay, so these are some things that we're gonna do, and we're going to do some things top down, and we're not gonna apologize for it. She restructured our Department of Education. We did not have an Office of Early Childhood Education. So she stood up an Office of Early Childhood Education. She also stood up an Office of Professional Development so that we could respond to requests for school districts. Also stood up an Office of Intervention Services. One thing that we found out was that we had good cause exemptions in our law, and then also individual reading plans and all these interventions, and then there was no one to answer the phone if someone called to ask, what do you mean by intensive intervention? So there were some things put in our law, like you, that we had to then respond to and make sure that those things were happening and that we were able to support our teachers in our school districts. But I think most importantly for us, with our coaching model, we were really able to get in those schools on the ground. And, again, when I say, walking in your authority as a state education agency, one thing that we noticed was that our principals and school district superintendents, that they wanted help. Like they wanted to know. It's great. Sometimes our school boards are the ones saying we have the authority, but the principals and the teachers are like, somebody just kind of tell us what to do. Give us some guidance in those things. So we were really able to give them some guidance kind of top down around what our expectations were statewide. And for parent meetings, because I know you'll be able to use your regional and your directors. I always say my first 2 years were PR, and I went across the state like me. And a few of my staff, and we had every year we have like 8 in-person before COVID parent meetings, where especially in those areas like our Delta area, poorest areas of the state, it's really hard for parents to get internet, all of those things. We would go to those communities and allow parents to come in situations just like this after we did our thing and our little presentation to really ask us hard questions. But then I also made sure that district representatives were there, because there were going to be some questions that were specific to the district that, as a State Department, we couldn't answer. We made sure there was media coverage, like we made, all of those things that we had to leverage, but we had to, as the state agency, get in the mix. And really just, we're telling everybody your children have to be ready by the end of 3rd grade. So we had to show them that we would be right there with them. And I do think that you will be able to, with very intentional coordination with your coordinators, get a consistent message out that you want to make sure that all districts are aware of.
Can I add one thing to that, Rupen? I just kind of want to piggyback on that by adding to that at the department working in collaboration with district and regional support. So we have care schools. And so what does that support look like? And so a lot of times schools feel like, I've got this person coming in here, I've got this person coming in here, I've got this person coming in here, and where's the alignment? And so that's part 2 of how we're working to dig down. So that specialist is going to work on those CARES teams and work in support with those CARES groups to help think about how do we support them at that individual school level within those schools. And like Kimiana has said, our rollout is different. We are not just choosing the schools, and we're doing a statewide rollout and a statewide implementation of this work. But I do believe that with collaboration within the department, if we can work with those folks who are digging down at that school level, which we've already met with them and are working through that, to make them a part of that process and include us in that process, then districts are continually getting a consistent message instead of hearing different pieces from different departments about what this work looks like.
Right. Do you mind if I push a little bit?
Yeah.
You know, the literacy specialist in the district, we've talked a little bit about the functions and the benefits. And they are going to be working with school leads, because each school also has their lead. Are you meeting with the school leads? Are you looking at who the school leads are? In order for that literacy specialist work to really be productive, there needs to be a lead in school who has the capacity to then coach. And from my work in the field, I know of some schools, you know, where the literacy lead is a principal or is an assistant principal and might not have that, well, definitely does not have that capacity.
Right. So one way I think that we're very fortunate is that in the Office of Early Learning, we have our consultants, right? 2 for every region. I know my Northwest region. Jenny is here from North Central, and we know our leaders in our regions, and we do have a great opportunity there. And the districts are going to be a part of the hiring too of those early literacy specialists. They're going to be internal, so they are going to have a part of that hiring process. So we have an opportunity there to utilize our relationships with district leads to say, okay, what do you know about your coaches in your district, and where does our specialists need to support you the most? We're going to have some global support that we do during monthly meetings and things like that, but where do they really need to jump in those schools to support those coaches as they coach? How do they support you with leading those PLCs around letters, so teachers are actually having conversations around what they're learning? That's going to look very different in some districts than districts I have, where I have a district where one of my principals serves as the curriculum lead for the district simultaneously. And in that district, that specialist needs to understand he or she are going to be in every single school, going school to school. And you can in that instance if you're that one person with 5 schools, because you can do that work a little bit more easily. So the role is going to have to adapt to the district that they serve. And the goal with hiring internally from within that district is that A, the district is a part of it and their district leadership is, and B, that person knows the district they're serving. You're not taking me and putting me all the way over in the Sandhills and putting me in a district where I don't know anyone. And it's a whole new learning. Granted, we're going to have to spend some time, and there has to be understanding that coaching requires relationship. And you don't just walk in and be like, I want to see letters, I want to see that phonics instructional routine, right? I mean, it's going to take time to build that relationship. So while our coaches might hit the door in August, if that happens, then it's going to take some time for them to build relationship and trust for true coaching that's collaborative to occur.
Thank you for that. You know, you talk about the work of the coach will need to change depending on the district, and I would say that it extends beyond coaching. We had a question from a reader, and Kimiana was just talking about getting into districts and they wanted the help. Monroe Richardson, the executive director for Read Charlotte, likes to point to a statistic, and you had a question that was very similar to this one. Do you want to ask that one?
Okay. This first one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so one of the things that's interesting about North Carolina is just the range of districts, right? So the median district size is about 5,200 students. I'm from Mecklenburg County. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools is about 30 times as large, right? So, you know, we often talk about differentiating instruction, right, in the classroom, but I'm really curious about differentiating support for districts, right? And you've got some districts that are very large, have large curriculum departments, and then you've got some that are very small and have, you know, you may have someone with the same role, but they're wearing, or same title, but they're wearing many hats. And so as you think about coaching and, you know, sort of the model that you shared, I'm curious what thoughts you might have around how do we differentiate support for districts across the state that are in very different places in terms of their capacity and needs.
So that's a great question. I think, again, that's one of the goals of having that person be within the district. I mean, they've got to know the district that they serve. And when you know the district that you serve, you can better serve them the way they need to be served. And when you think about curriculum, so for example, to tie it to that question, we have some districts, the district I came from before, Winston-Salem, we have entire curriculum departments. There is a process for how you adopt curriculum. They have policy around how you adopt curriculum. There's another district I serve now that I just met with around curriculum adoption. And while as a state agency, we don't recommend specific curriculum, what we are doing is we are recommending tools that they use to evaluate curriculum. So we want them to be good consumers of the evaluation process is what we're trying to teach them. The Reading League has a great tool. I think they just renamed it. It came out today. They just redid their evaluation tool. That's what districts need. And that doesn't matter if you're a district of 400 or 40,000. They need the tools to evaluate it. And you know, the one thing about this work, many districts have paid to go through letters for their leaders at the district level. That wasn't included in the legislation. So what we're having to do is we're having to build background information and knowledge for leaders at the district level so they know how to be good consumers of product and not just look for that gold star now that says science or reading, just like many years ago it said, you know, award, right, standard, right, and you look for those gold stars. So what we're having to do is front load leaders. I was with the district this week doing literacy for leaders, literally talking about what are the components, what is the science of reading, what is it not, what are you looking for, and then how do you evaluate curriculum based off of what you now know about what the science of reading really is. That to me, I have learned, having been fortunate enough, Amy lets me tag along when she goes across the state, that seems to be universal no matter the size. What is different is the actual process. So some districts, we have to give them the process, and we share some state models from Rhode Island and other states. Alabama has some really great models out there. We'll share with them what their process was. Other districts are like, no, we've got a policy, we've got a process, this is the way we have to do it. But they still need the tools to do a good evaluation. That's the part that seems to be universal.
And the Office of Early Learning is going to be doing like a road show almost, right? Going into to regions and talking about how, like, the process of choosing.
We
high
are.
quality. What are the tools? Like, what are some of the things that, has it been planned yet? What are some of the things you're going to?
Well, I can give you an example. Several of our regions have already started. We started in the Northwest, what's called, and every region will be doing this with their consultants. We started in Northwest, we call it a literacy network. The North Central calls it Circle Time, right? We have another region that calls it something else, and we gather our leaders from our region and bring them together. Now, it's twofold. We have information we want to share and get across to the region, but then they come with their questions and tell us things they need from us and what do they need to discuss. So what we were able to do, like I said, we are not able to, you know, give curriculum specific recommendations, but what we can tell you is what should be in a curriculum and what that curriculum should address and look like. And so that's what we did. When we had them gathered in that space, we did that together. And we talked through, these are the tools, and we gave them rubrics, several different kinds of rubrics, right? Not just the Reading League. The Reading League is a really simple, easy to use tool. Some people wanted to dig in more, so we went in and gave them some REL tools. We gave them the Rhode Island tools. You know, some of our states have created some really complex systems. Some of our districts were ready for that. Some of them are like, no, we're going to use the Reading League tool, and we got to begin there with the green and the red checkboxes, right, to make sure we're just on track. So those are the kind of supports we do. Now from there, I have districts that I've gone into and sat with their principals and sat with their team and helped guide them through the actual process of how do you evaluate a curriculum. But we also have to remember, we talk a lot about high quality instructional materials, just like we talk a lot about letters training. Both are critically important, but they're only pieces to the puzzle, and the curriculum adoption is just the beginning. Where they really need support after that is implementation. So how are you monitoring what you're doing with this curriculum you actually choose? That's the work, right? The adoption is this much, and the using the curriculum is this much, because I can speak this truth as an educator. You can give me a curriculum and I can be like, oh, I really like this part, my kids really love this part, I'm gonna do this part, and then I'm gonna skip this part. And then a year later, a district says, well, it didn't work. We used it, but it didn't work. But how do you know how you used it? And so, you know, it's a trite word now in education, fidelity, but fidelity matters. Fidelity matters when you're using curriculum. You're going to pay that much for a curriculum and use that curriculum. It doesn't take away my efficacy as a teacher to teach that curriculum, because only I know my children. Dr. Louisa Motes always says, teachers teach children, not curriculum. And it's the truth. But I do need that guide. I need that scope and sequence, and I need it to be aligned.
Go ahead.
Do you mind if I
Yeah.
just, I want to add something about curriculum. When you are adopting a curriculum, make sure that you are paying for the professional development that goes along with it, and make sure that you're giving teachers a runway for implementation. A lot of times we adopt curricula that July 1, when that money rolls over, the new money comes in, y'all know what I'm talking about. And you're saying, okay, we want to get a new curriculum, and we need to start teaching it in August. Oh, well, yeah, the PD will start in October.
Right.
Right? So I think that now, especially with so much money that our schools have, these bold investments in curriculum should also include the investment in professional development, so that their teachers do understand that if I skip this part, and then when I assess my students, they're really not going to have the whole picture, that this is really integral to the lesson, and they need to know why that it's integral to the lesson. So I would say, with the professional development, making sure that you are including that with the curriculum. And then one more thing. As you're thinking about differentiating your coaching, one thing that you spoke about, I would urge you to come up with a model. And I know you're saying that, once you go into the district, you'll know your schools, but I think for consistency, utilizing a data point or some data points. For us, we identified schools based on 2 years of third grade ELA data. If they're not doing it in third grade, we had our consistent state assessment. Now you all do have your KG2 assessment. But we looked at that data, and again, we rank ordered based on the highest percentage of students who were below proficient. All schools that received coaches all across the state knew why. They knew that they were a part of this list, and this is the data that we use, and this is how they were identified. So as you are communicating with your specialists as they're going out and as they're making these decisions as to how they're going to differentiate their coaching or for whom they will prioritize, come up with some kind of consistent model so that they're not saying, oh, well, I'm in this district and I was chosen because of this. And then someone in another district said, well, my school was chosen for more support because of this. So if you can come up with something that everyone understands, then I think that would be beneficial in communicating your process and going forward.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And then one more thing to add about the PD and the curriculum piece as well. I like to tell districts, when you are purchasing a curriculum, you're running that show. You are the purchaser. They don't tell you how to do your implementation and do all that. You are in charge of that. And so one of those pieces is speaking about the PD. That PD is really crucial, but I would have the vendor do that PD for me and give me an overview before they do it in front of my teachers. Because if that initial PD is not any good, you've lost your teachers from the get-go. And they'll leave that PD and be like, I'm never doing that curriculum because that was the worst training. And it could be amazing. Maybe that trainer had a bad day. I don't know. But I like to see what they're going to do before they do it, so I know what my teachers are going to hear. And I think that just helps to empower districts to know that this is their decision. They're running this show. They can ask for some of these things. And 9 times out of 10, a lot of vendors will do it because they want to give you their way.
And are you all training your school boards on the science of reading?
Not
not
yet.
letters.
Is that the right answer?
I mean, not letters, of course. But really, with local control and your school districts, your school boards being able to make these purchasing decisions, do they have enough background information to say, yes, we're going to purchase that? Or, no, from what I read in Rupen's article, this is not this is not aligned to this science of reading thing everybody is talking about, right? I think that we have to begin to include our school boards in some of these conversations. And I always say your agenda reflects your priorities. If all they're doing at these school board meetings is just approve, and there's not an opportunity for a vendor or for a school principal that says, hey, I've tried this. Let's just, at this board meeting tonight, I want to talk about how it has impacted my school. We need to make sure that those who are making those decisions are also well aware of these types of conversations that we're having around best practices.
Yeah, and I think that the answer is similar to the answer, to a lot of questions. I mean, it depends on the district. There's a great amount of disparity. We've, EdNC's been in districts where every month they report to the school board. And then I've been in districts where the school board doesn't even know what this is about, right? And they're just sort of taking.
I think, Rihanna, you've said this before, it's where are your priorities? Literacy should be on every agenda. If it is your priority, it is on your agenda. As far as the school boards, it's interesting that should come up, that you brought that point up, because we did have some districts ask and say, we're getting ready to go in front of our school boards, we're getting ready to talk about this, what do we do? We did create a universal PowerPoint that they can use with background information that we shared out across the state with our literacy leaders that had some of that generic information, and some of them did reach out for additional support and how to use that with their school boards. But much like Ruben said, we're not saying that that's happening at every school board across every district.
Right. We have another question, but before I come to you, Laura, I wonder if we can extend this question to the UNC system, because there's a lot of disparity between the universities also. What do you do at the system level? How much, how much authority do you have to look at what materials they're using to teach teacher candidates, and how much can you tell them?
Well, that's a really good question. We don't have a whole lot in that regard in terms of the materials that they use, but I think for us, kind of starting with this unified, these are the non-negotiables. Competencies, sub-competencies, this is what has to be included in your program. Now, I think what will happen is a part of our science of reading study that will happen through this fall. I think that's going to come out in terms of what textbooks are used, and does this align with the science of reading? Because I'm almost certain there are some that are not. And so when that's illuminated, that's an opportunity for us to have a conversation and say, okay, this is not meeting what we said we were going to do in terms of being a part of the solution to this issue that is facing our state. And we have to be responsible for that. I think, too, we also have to remember that our faculty who are doing this work right now and have been doing this work, they're in a vulnerable place because they're having to kind of really re-examine in some cases and really shift their thinking. And so that means we have to understand that's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take some coaching, just like our classroom teachers. And so it would be great if we, oh yes, you must do X, Y, and Z. But at the same time, I think doing this in such a way where we're working on this together, I think it's going to get us a lot more buy-in and a lot more traction, especially with our ed prep programs, because they have a tremendous amount of autonomy.
Thank you.
Dr. I'm Kevin Smith, and I've worked in school PR for a while, and so I'm thinking from the parent and the student and the school board perspective. So since y'all are further along than North Carolina in terms of data that shows how it works, there was a lot of conversation. All the models show that parent engagement is a critical component of this. Do you have data that shows how significant a component, or models that worked for getting parent engagement to work? And in North Carolina, all the policymakers and people all the way from the ground up through the central office to the state agencies are really worried about or thinking about how to make parent engagement effective. Do you all have anything that shows how that worked for you?
Actually, no, we do not. We have not done any studies on parental engagement. I think that one of the things that we spent a lot of our funding on is professional development. We did a study early on that was released in 2017 around the impact of professional development in the classroom, looking at teacher practice. We've also had some surveys done through Excel and Ed where they have done collected qualitative data, talked to teachers about what you're saying, about how do they feel? Do they feel they were supported? They know all of those things. But we have not done any, we haven't collected any data about parental engagement. And that's very interesting, and that's something that we probably should look at. I know I've read the Harvard studies about parental engagement really has more impact than a parent's educational level. Because we always want to say, well, this child's parent went to college, or their parents said, well, parental engagement and being able to even just talk to your child about, well, what are you reading? You know, even if it's something that you haven't read. Oh, well, tell me what your favorite part is. You know, just even those types of question stems to get them engaged and to also just let them know that you care about what's going on, you know, in the school, and that you're gonna hold them accountable because you're gonna ask them questions. Things that we can try to work with families about by not feeling ashamed if they don't have a certain level of education, you can still be engaged. So that's very interesting. You know, we do some studies at Accelerate, so I might run that by one of our states to do.
I was just thinking tomorrow when I meet with the Office of Learning and Recovery, I'm gonna add that to my list of items to take a look at, because I think that's really important. I also think another point that's really important is working with families on understanding and the legislation and what their rights are. You have a right to be informed when your child's getting an intervention. You have a right to know when your child and how your child is performing. And you have a right to come into schools and ask those questions, and that's a legislative right? That's given, it's a parental right, obviously, but let them know those pieces as well, as much as we want them engaged as well. And I think that's a great way to get them engaged, to know, you know, they need to know that the Digital Children's Reading Initiative legislation states that the district has to offer those resources, paper, pencil, if you can't access them digitally. And so those are little nuggets of information we need to get out there for families to know.
It sounds like a webinar.
Well, I mean, those were the exact things that we were talking about to parents in person. But if there's a way that you can do this and record it in a way, and of course in a place where it's easily accessible to parents. I always say our MDE website, we revamped it and still couldn't find things. And I was on the committee. We still couldn't find some things. So because you have a place for parents, just record a webinar for parents to say those things. These are the things that you should be looking for. A parental notification letter comes out after the, you know, so many days after your child has been screened. It looks like this, you know. Those types of things where, again, a lot of times these conversations, you know, really kind of begin and end with people like us who are in this room and in this type of space. And then we send the emails out to the school districts. Then they try to send it to parents, or then, you know, and again, messages get lost. So I think that would be a great, you know, we do a lot of webinars for teachers.
I think that would be great.
I think so too, and I'm thinking how then do we partner with community organizations who are really boots on the ground that really can get it to parents, right? So not just coming from the district perspective, but, you know, I'm thinking from my own perspective in Winston, Latino Services, and other Reach, you know, there's Reach Charlotte, but there's Read WS, all these organizations who have contacts with families and have even closer connections in communities than even the school systems do a lot of times, quite frankly. How do we get that information to them so they can get it out? So, and all kinds of homework tonight. Thank y'all.
That'd be a great beginning of school year type of thing, where these organizations can put your webinar, your video, your recorded video on their sites. And the traffic that they get, and you know that these organizations get traffic from parents and things like that, and they'll have this consistent message from DPI to parents. Yeah.
Well,
Y'all, we just forgot y'all were here. That's
Let's go to one of our reader questions. Says, we know that our literacy rates are higher for white adults than black and brown adults. And I'm assuming, I know that's true in North Carolina, I'm assuming that's what we're talking. We also know that reading in the home does have an impact on things like print speech, relationships, vocabulary, and background knowledge. And we know that our reading proficiency is higher for white students than our black and brown students. This is averages we're talking about. Will implementation of this law address these inequities, and how will implementation take into account that some students need more support if we are to reach our goal of each and every student reading at grade level?
So let me begin by saying we know that without literacy, there is no equity. It is crucial. I think there's a trite answer I could give to this question, right? Will implementation of this law address, right? And I think the key word there is implementation. How is it going to be implemented? The pieces, like I said earlier, quite frankly, for the first time I felt in a while, and you said the same thing, Laura, the pieces are in the legislation. The individual reading plans, the intervention plans, the instructional standards for how we teach, the parental notification pieces around this information, and what do we do for students who need intervention. The key is going to be implementation, and how do we support districts in that implementation. And even when we support, when I think about the literacy intervention plans, we were really specific and intentional with our districts. We were really specific when we went in and met with them about how do you really implement these services that you have for core, supplemental, and intensive. And that's how you differentiate, is supplemental and intensive. But then again, that involves districts understanding what's the difference between core instruction and how you're approaching this work. And what's the difference in how you're approaching the students that you teach? Are you understanding, are your teachers understanding the students that they're teaching? Do they understand their families? Are they working in collaboration with them? I think there's a lot that goes into that question, and I feel like we're always too still constantly searching. And obviously in North Carolina, in 2019 NAEP, we were at 36%. So that's provision or above, right? So our students need all the things, and then there was a 20% gap between our white students and our black and brown students with that NAEP data. So could implementation of this address those? Yes, it's designed, the law is designed that way, but the implementation is where the rubber hits the road, and I think quite frankly that is yet to be seen as we look at our data. And I'd really love to hear what Kamiana has to say as far as on the, you're never on the back end of this work, it's always going to be the work, but did you feel like it addressed it? And if it did, how did that go?
Well, we actually do have some data.
I know.
One thing that's not highlighted often is in 2019, when we had those gains, our low-income white, black, and brown students outperformed their peers nationally in fourth grade reading. One thing that tells us is that it's not about zip code. You'll always hear me say invest in people. In some of our just historically lowest performing school districts, we had those students who were performing well. We had more teacher retention because they had coaches who were supporting them in schools. We had more administrators who were staying because they began to see some successes. And then it was evident in our 2019 data. Our children really benefited from being in schools with teachers. And I think that's why everyone's now kind of sitting on their hands about this 22 NAEP administration, just really trying to see the impact of COVID. But one thing that we know is that we had gained traction and that we were seeing positive gains and results in areas that we had never seen before incrementally, which is the way it's supposed to be. Had we just shot up from 209 to 219, this would be an entirely different conversation. But incrementally, we were seeing those gains, and to know that our low-income students in Mississippi outperformed low-income students nationally, that says a lot. And we can't honestly just put it, our finger on, well, this Literacy Act will do it.
Right.
I think that's going to have to be the consistent message. There's not going to be this one thing. You mentioned earlier, Laura, what gets measured gets done. So it's about the words of the law, it's about the implementation, it's about monitoring that, the progress of it. And if it's not working, stop it. The practice, not the law. if the practices aren't working, you have to find out sooner than later. And you don't go 2 years by saying, well, this is what we said we're going to do, we're just going to keep doing it until it works. You have to monitor the progress. The same thing we would do with interventions for students. When those interventions are not working, then we have to try something else. So as we think about all of these components and principles that we've talked about, supports for parents, supports for teachers, supports for students, supports for administrators, then we know what to do. It's just how we do it that sometimes we're going to have to really refine those processes, but we're going to have to continue to monitor those things. So
I think too, when we look at disaggregated data and think about gaps, I think a lot of times we get numb to data, and then we also have some schools who are we see 70%, and we think, well, 36% is this, well, 70% is amazing. Well, you look at 70% and you look at their disaggregated data, and you can see where the 30% is coming from. We need to start highlighting that's happening across schools as well, because I've had leaders tell me, well, we're at 80%. Well, great, when you get to 95%, then we can maybe have a conversation, because that's what we know. Every student, 95% of our children are able to be taught to read. And when you tell me 70%, okay, so which 3 parents are you going to tell that their students are going to be illiterate? And so when you're looking at a school that's at 70%, you look at their disaggregated data, you can tell which parents you're going to be telling in that situation. So I think too, we don't want to get numb to thinking, oh, this is great, this is where we are, we've arrived, when we haven't in some schools.
Yeah. We have it. Even regardless of what nature, we have it.
So I'm going to ask, we're coming up on 8 o'clock here. So I'm going to ask 2 back-to-back questions. We're in a lightning round here. It's somewhat of a lightning round. The question is, for Kelly and for Laura, do you have the funding you need to implement this law well?
I'll go first on this one. I think we were very fortunate to have private donors to be able to support the work in terms of getting some faculty involved in the letters training and doing this redesign work. But that was for their generosity. It would be really nice to be able to have that support, especially for our really small campuses who need, they need coaches too to kind of go in and help them through this process. So, we definitely would welcome additional dollars to be able to do that. We want to make sure that all of our ed prep programs have high quality graduates so that we can be assured that they're going to go into any classroom in our public schools and do well and impact student achievement positively.
So when I see this question, it kind of makes me chuckle a little bit, because I want to say, can we have a chance to get started with what we've been given? And then we can let you know really what we need, because we have been so fortunate, and we have been given a strong piece of legislation. We've been giving funding for teacher support, for intervention plans, for evaluation, for districts to implement those intervention plans, but we really just got started. So I feel like I'd be jumping the gun if I said we needed more here, or we needed more here for this, because I really want to see how well we do with what we've been given, and is it working, before we ask for more, honestly. With that being said, one thing that would be nice would be to have a built-in evaluation structure, where we're not having the Office of Learning Recovery is amazing, but is there a way to have some support, additional support in addition to that, for an evaluator, evaluation of what we're doing to help us guide and think through pieces we're not missing, because we're so in the weeds of the work. We're not thinking about, are we evaluating parent engagement? Are we, right, we're thinking about intervention plans and literacy data, all these pieces. So someone to help us think more broadly about how we evaluate as we go, so then we can make strategic decisions and well-informed decisions about, we do need more money, or this money was well spent, or we did great with this, so we can make the right decisions around the work.
Yeah, so a little time to be intentional with it, which might be the answer to this one also, which is, if $5 million was available in private funding to fill gaps around the law, implementation of the law, what would you want to see done?
Can I go?
I got friends.
So certainly, for me, and on the other hat that I wear in terms of lab schools, they were not included as a part of the legislation, and so we have started there, but we know that's only for our K-3 folks. We would love to be able to expand that. It's also important because our lab schools do serve a population by statute who have not been successful in schools, and so being able to have that would be really, really helpful, because they're already asking me today, like, do we have any slots left? Can you support this? And so for me, that would be really helpful. And again, being able to help our institutions, making sure that their redesign efforts are of high quality and just really solid, and the data that we can show them now so that they can see what they need to do each year in order to improve so that we can get the outcomes that we want.
In addition to the evaluation piece, which I'm going to still stick to my guns on that one, I might be going out on a limb here with this next piece, but I'll just go out on a limb. I'd really be interested to see the possibilities around incentivizing the use of high-quality instructional materials. So if you choose high-quality instructional materials that meet these specifications and fall within these parameters and these guidelines, then you can have partial funding to help support, or any type of funding to help support your purchase of those high-quality instructional materials. That's another a big issue across the state. And I know a lot of it has to do with how districts choose to spend their funding, but a lot of time that's the bottom of the barrel. And a lot of times we're making instructional materials decisions around what's left instead of making the best choice for what we need in the classroom.
Thank you. I just have one last question. It's for Kimiana. You know, you've been talking with North Carolina leaders for years now, and you've had a chance to catch up with Kelly and Laura tonight. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the direction. And I mean, you're working with 23 states in the District of Columbia. What are your thoughts on the direction that North Carolina is headed in this moment?
Well, in this moment, I always say that their law is spot on, especially including higher education. One thing that I would really like to see is for you all to begin to just codify your approach to, in order to replicate something that becomes successful, you have to know what you've done and you have to be able to put some things in place. Because even with just some, districts or the specialists saying, okay, this is what I'm doing to work in this district, what if they did that in another district? Would the thing still work? How can we begin to just codify some of our approaches across the state in this push forward for everyone? I think that would be the thing. The guidance around. We have so many guidance documents, I can do a template like nobody's business. But we felt it was just extremely important to give guidance on everything. What is the best practice for the individual reading plan? Is it for the coach to come with the teachers and look at data and then they can begin it and then the coach actually say after 8 weeks, let's progress monitor and see, what is the guidance around that? What is the guidance around our family literacy nights? What is the guidance around data walls? And we also had non-negotiables in order for our coaches to work in schools. Now this is something, I don't even know how we were able to pull it off, but we did. In order for our coaches to work in schools, the principals had to agree to certain non-negotiables. They were, one of them was writing connected to the standards. The other was the commitment to having at least a 90-minute or 120-minute uninterrupted literacy block. So we at least have to have a frame, for it, right?
Word walls? You had to have word walls?
Yes, they had to have word walls. Yeah, you've seen it, huh?
I've done a little reading.
They had to have word walls, they had to have data walls, they had to have time in their schedules for PLCs. They had to have a data PLC, a content PLC, so there were these things that were structurally, as an administrator, in order for us to come in and do our work, you have to commit to doing this. And then there was, I remember one school in a district where the principal just kind of was saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna do it. We started in August, oh yeah, we'll have it done. So by October, they hadn't even started. And our chief academic officer called the superintendent and said, well, if you all can't provide us a space in which we can be successful, then we're gonna pull out of your school. And oh, by the way, we'll make sure that we let your legislator know why we're not there. Because we are responsible to, our citizens for spending their dollars on support. Now, I don't recommend this, but the superintendent actually moved the principal and called us back and said, okay, I have somebody who's willing. Can you all come back into our school? We were just very, also just kind of hands-on, and I know that we're smaller than North Carolina, so there were, our CAO would actually look at the printout from letters trainings. We would have them to send it to us. And if she saw a district that hadn't sent any teachers, she would call the superintendent and say, hey, looking at this list, I noticed you haven't sent anyone. Do you want to get in the next cohort? We can send you the link. So those types of things where it was really just keeping our fingers on the pulse of the implementation piece of it. But I really do think that for you to begin to reflect on some things that you will have to say, for our coaches, for them to differentiate their instruction, for our literacy leads to differentiate their coaching, I'm sorry. I think I don't know what's going on. For them to differentiate their coaching, we use this model. We chose schools in districts based on this. And then you can see if those types of things are working.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for caring about this issue. Thanks to our guests. We're grateful for everything you do for our students, for our state, for our future. Thanks.